Again, thanks a lot for having me over. I am so excited to be here with you all today. I've been in many other initiatives in the past, and I am very excited and actually nervous because it's much more this time. So thanks a lot for having me over. So as my colleagues have mentioned, I am from Baker Hughes. I'm from the energy transition team. I work on technology integration engineering primarily. So technology integration leader for a team called Climate Technology Solutions. So very relevant, I think, in this day and age. And hopefully, at the end of this presentation, I get to inspire many of you to pursue a career in STEM, like, or at least discover what's out there for many of you. So, um, I'm originally from the Philippines. I was born there. This is the map of the Philippines. So, it's not so close, I know, and I didn't come from the capital, so I didn't grow up in a big city like some of you. I like came from a small town called Talavera. It's a province called Nueva Ecija with around 3,000 inhabitants. So it's a small town, eh? And I kid you not, I was 7 when we had electricity in our house. And I thought that was normal. I thought it was only invented, like 7 years after I was born. But we're living in a far flung place in a developing country. It did take a while for engineering advancement to reach my tiny little town up north. So I moved to Manila eventually, and the capital of the Philippines is actually the 12th biggest city in the world in terms of population. So it's 13 million inhabitants, and actually one of the densest cities in the world. So 41,500 individuals per square kilometer. I don't know what that's in miles, but it's really a lot of people in such a in such a small space, huh? So what I wanted to underscore here is that whether you're coming from a far-flung area, far from the city, or in a dense capital, energy is needed, right? Like we have it's a basic human right, like to have energy, food, water, and shelter. And I'm very passionate about this, having lived in both kinds of environment, that we actually have to make our resources available, like equitably to um to humankind, regardless of where they are from, or where they are born, or where they were raised or studied. So it's very insightful for me to get exposed to both kinds of environment. And now I'm based in Brussels, so if that's the Philippines, okay, that's actually Singapore. I studied in Singapore. That's why I put the arrow there. So I came from Philippines to Singapore and then to Brussels, which is about 10,000 kilometers away. So now I'm here in Brussels. I've been living here for about 7 years, and I'm a chemical engineer. I started my career as a process engineer, as you see in the picture. So I started my career at Shell, so one of the biggest energy companies in the world. So I was doing the real, I would say, like really physically touching equipment, like going in the refinery, going in the chemical facility to make sure that everything is operating smoothly. So I was in charge of some of the process units to make fuels. And then I moved to different parts of the site. I was also responsible for providing energy for the refinery and also the utilities, like water or air that's needed for the process to work. So yes, I was doing that. And the last picture you see me speaking and smiling, I was also the campus ambassador for the company. So I go around different schools and do the same thing I'm doing right now. But of course, I have more things to share now because this was a long time ago, like X years ago. I won't tell you how long this is ago. And then I am very passionate about research. So after a couple of years of spending time in a big company, I moved back to the university and pursued my passion in energy research. So one of my first research position is working on solar cell fabrication. So you see this tiny square, like the dark box or slab there. This constitutes one cell of a solar panel module that you can buy, or maybe some of you have in their houses, or maybe your neighbors or in your community. So we're trying to improve the efficiencies of solar cell by altering process conditions, testing out different materials. And mind you, many of the materials used to fabricate solar cells are actually expensive. So to make it affordable for everyone, we're researching methods and protocols to make sure that we can reduce the cost down. So to make it affordable, especially for my hometown, so that we can also afford having solar cells and not rely all the time on the grid for our power. So I did it for a bit. I learned a lot. I met a lot of great, interesting people from different cultures all over the world. And I eventually did a grad study. Like I did a PhD. So uh, it's an advanced degree. So after your high school, you have the university for some of you who might want to pursue that career track, but you also have a technical school. And after that, there's one more where you specialize really on a topic, where you really specialize on a specific area of research. So you can do like a master's degree or a doctorate degree. So I did a doctorate degree on material science. What you see there, I'm holding that kind of dark powder. It's a very interesting type of material because it can adsorb, it can suck carbon dioxide, a greenhouse gas emission, causing global warming in such a small powder. Small amount of powder can kind of attract a lot of these greenhouse gas molecules, these pollutant molecules. And once you have them there, you can store them underground or you can convert them to other useful chemicals. So I did that for a couple of years, and I like it. Like I was spending a long time in the lab trying to understand the different technologies, different chemistry. Some of you may have passion in like chemistry. I knew I wanted to do chemistry because I was playing a lot with some of the fruits and leaves that in our backyard. I like slice them and mix them and generate some colors. So I kind of was doing the same, but for a different purpose, for materials, for um uh for removing pollutants from the atmosphere. So I also get to test some cool equipment to see if my material is working. So long before COVID, I was already doing a lot of some sort of a costume, like to make sure that my process is correct and following protocols, from different process conditions. And I also get to share this with different individuals of different types of demographics. So I get to speak with scientists. I get to speak with policymakers, industry, and most importantly, I get to speak with um, kids. Like these are like my favorite audience. As you see here, we travel and go to different parts of Belgium. We started in Belgium and kind of help educate kids on the different cool technologies that we are inventing. And I still do this now on weekends, and I'm happy that I also get the chance to share this with you today. So what you see here, that small box, is actually a chocolate 3D printer. So it might have some future applications, when you need to send food on space, maybe you don't need to, when we start living in Mars sometime in 2100, you don't need to send food up there. You just send a printer and you can print the food there with the right nutrition that's needed for those who are there, so these kinds of things. So this kind of futuristic vision for a technology. So I find it really cool, and we get to eat what we print. So it's super fun and yummy at the same time. um as I told you, I'm very passionate about science communication. Okay. And what my mission one of my missions in life is to make sure that every time I communicate a scientific discovery, that it's well understood by the masses, regardless of your age or your discipline in your research or your interest. So this is the one of the titles of my research. Integrated clean room process for the large area deposition of zeolitic imidazolate framework thin films. Case of a capacitive sensor. Like if I were like 10 or 11, I was like, huh? What's this? Right? So I'll attempt to explain it to you in a layman's term in a very, very short period of time. Okay. So you see on the screen is a dog, right? Did you know that the most sensitive sensor out there is a dog? Or specifically a dog's nose. That's why you still see them in airports, or maybe if you go to London in one of the King's Cross station, for example, you will see sometimes dogs because they are a very good sniffer, way better than any other technological sensor that we have. It's cute, it's nice to have, but sometimes it can be a little bit inconvenient because you cannot do systematic tests. You always have to like carry the dog and sniff into your bags. What if I tell you that you can actually have a dog's nose in your smartphones using material science? Would you believe me? Well, I'm sure you will because I did it in my research. Um, so the powder that you see earlier, the kind of purple dark powder, these are materials called metal organic frameworks. So metal organic frameworks or MOFs, MOFs, you will see that in your workbook. These are sponges, like these are very small sponges that are very, very kind of like smaller than a strand of your hair. 100,000 times smaller than the strand of your hair. So imagine a sponge at that dimension. And this sponge, this MOFs, this is a subdiscipline of material science. You can actually convert this into some sort of a shape, right? And we're using it to detect certain gas molecules for different applications. So let's imagine, for example, diagnosing COVID or a respiratory ailment using MOFs. You can think of your breath, the molecules in your lungs as a collection of many different shapes and sizes, like the different gas molecules in our breath. So you see here triangle, square, star shaped molecule. The MOF, can be designed in such a way that it will only detect the shape you want to get detected. Like this kindergarten game that you used to play back when we were kids. So when you have a gas molecule that snugly fits into the MOF, this is the only material that will get detected into your let me see if the animation works. Okay, I tested this, so this should work. Yes. So if you have a sensor in your smartphone and then you put a MOF of a particular size and shape, it will not detect other gas molecules. It will only detect the molecule you wanted to put in there. And then your smartphone will have some sort of electronics to give you that, hey, outside normal levels are reached, right? So it's kind of like a super sensitive detector that you have, like a dog's nose, but this time digitally embedded in your smartphones. And you can also apply it for different applications. For example, like medical experts are uh, correlating the different molecules in your breath to see whether you have early signs of diseases such as maybe COVID or maybe lung cancer. And that could really help prevent these diseases at its early stage, right? So it has a lot of applications in the medical world. You can also use it for safety. For example, if you're inside maybe a house and then there is some sort of a nearby truck that emits a lot of toxic gases like carbon monoxide, this sensor could alert you to get out of where you are so that you're not exposed to these toxic gases. Or maybe even you can use that smartphone to put that into food, and then it will give you some sort of an indication whether it's still good to consume. So, as a student and as a cheapskate, I always buy this uh food that are close to expiry, in the supermarket, like maybe from Tesco or a Sainsbury. So these are like the cheaper options, right? So I maybe this could be something that can be used in the future so that we will have less food wastes, for example, right? So So yeah, so that's my research. I developed this material called MOFs, or metal organic frameworks, that you put into your smartphone so that we can unravel, or we can unlock this different types of applications in the future. I thought that was very exciting, and I really enjoyed doing this research and spending a lot of time in the lab playing with different chemistries. So now that you know a little bit more about myself and a little bit more about my journey before going to Baker Hughes and some of my background, I would like to go back to basics, as you see on the screen, on what
Alex,
energy transition is. Yes, yes,
Alex,
Marilisa.
sorry to interrupt you. We just had a bunch of questions for you.
Okay.
I don't know if you wanted to answer them now or after the session. But
Maybe we can answer one or two. Yes.
one key question was, what is material science? Lots of people were wondering.
All right. So material science is a study of materials, right? So it is a study of the composition, properties, and applications of different materials that you see everywhere. Your table, it's maybe composed of wood. So it has specific materials that make it suitable for this application because it's sturdy, it's hard. You also have, for example, your computer. That's a little bit more complex because it is composed of many different materials. It has a metal, it has a plastic, it has some kind of liquidy gel in the monitor that makes what it is, that makes it function the way it's supposed to be. And then you also have, for example, this glass. So this is where I put my tea. This is also a different type of material that serves its purpose, right? You can put hot water on it without it breaking, but that would not be possible for some of the plastics, right? So yeah, in a nutshell, material science is the study of composition, properties, and applications of various materials that you see in this world. Thanks for that,
Great.
Marilisa.
Sure. We also had people curious about what sciences you focused on when you were in high school.
All right. So I studied in a science high school. So there's a lot of chemistry, biology, and physics in our curriculum. Of course, I didn't like everything. I was really particularly interested in biology because I really wanted to become a medical doctor, but I'm just afraid of blood. But I really like studying the anatomy. I like biology. I like studying different parts of the human system because I really wanted to become a doctor, but it's just I'm afraid of blood, so I didn't pursue that. So I shifted to chemistry. I thought that was the closest. And I really like playing with natural products, like peels of fruits and understanding the composition of that. So I was lucky I get a chance to do that in school. And I had some great teachers like what you have right now and helped me understand or helped us understand me and my classmates the different why is this like this, and we can explain compositions and chemistries of many different substances and that we find in the world. So I really like natural products chemistry. So that was my main passion when I was a student. So let's go back to basics, right? So we talked about my story. We talked about my scientific journey. Now let's go and take a step back and understand what energy security is, energy transition, all these topics that everyone is so curious and oh so passionate about. All right. Okay, so let's do this in Menti. Our first question is the first word that comes into your mind when you hear the word energy transition. I'm interested to see what everyone is thinking when they hear the word energy or energy transition.
It should just be, it's just changed, I think. Yeah, it's just a slight lag for those of you who are still on the Q&A page.
Bills. I like that. Electricity, energy, power, green. All right. Well, I think we're getting a lot of very interesting answers here, which are actually terminologies that I would normally see in like high profile engagements. So with like policymakers, for example. So I guess you
We've
guys
got
are
some
on the
smart
right
kids on
track.
this call, Alex.
Yeah, very smart kids, I would say. Like hydroelectric power. Wow. Like a lot of you are really into the advanced level, huh? All right. Well, thanks a lot for participating, and I'm gonna review this, and maybe I'm gonna admire you all for all of your advanced knowledge about energy. So as what some of my colleagues here have mentioned, I could just step away because your knowledge is already so advanced. But let me try and walk you through some of the basics of energy transition, and at the end of this talk, I want you to be able to articulate this very clearly in your space at home or with your friends. To me, energy transition has a lot of definition, really, and it started historically, I think, a few decades ago when there is a move to go away from fossil fuels to renewables. Like the solar cells and the windmill. So that's a transition from the conventional to the renewables. But we have soon realized that it's not as simple as that. Remember when I was presenting my screen earlier and sharing you where I came from? It's impossible to build a lot of renewables in the place where I lived or where I was born because there's just no resources there. There's just um no company will invest in that small town or put up something that such a big infrastructure there. So to me, energy transition is much more than renewables, and it's also very different and depending on where you are living. Not all parts of the world are blessed with natural resources that they could harness. So we need to rethink the way we approach energy transition. In my humble opinion, if you allow me, to me, the energy transition is actually addressing a challenge, what we call the energy trilemma. So, a trilemma meaning there's not competing, but three factors that we have to balance in order for us to move our momentum in the energy transition space. Is that how do we make energy sustainable, affordable, and secure? I want you to internalize this. Maybe we can speak it all together. Energy is sustainable, affordable, and secure. Secure meaning it should be available for everyone in this planet. I think it's a basic human right to have energy, to be able to charge our phones, to be able to use clean cooking equipment through electrified stoves, for example, and not using all the time biomass or wood to cook. I think we should be able to, especially for those living in cold places like where we are here in Europe, to be able to warm their water for them to take a shower. So those kinds of things, I think we need to make energy secure, regardless of who you are or where you came from. We also need to make it affordable. This is not only for the rich and more privileged families. It has to be for everyone. All right. And most part of my passion in the energy transition team is to make it sustainable. Sustainability or sustainable means that when you use something, it won't compromise the ability of that resource to cater to the needs of the next generation. So, meaning your parents and my colleagues and myself are using our resources in such a way that when you grow up, you can also use it the same way as we're using it right now. All right, whether it's the plants that we're getting our apples, the vegetables or fruits, it should be able to do the same thing 30 years from now when you're the one doing it yourselves or earning a living. All right. So that's kind of like the definition of sustainability. And to me, energy transition is addressing the energy trilemma. It has to be secure, has to be affordable, and has to be sustainable. So I'm going to skip this for the mentee, but I'd like you to write this on your notes. Okay. What is the first word that comes into your mind when you hear the term emissions? Write it down and we can ponder about it later. Emissions, emitting something, smoke, fume, um, pollution. So yeah, emissions. So emissions is, I'm gonna show you a very busy slide, so I need your full undivided attention, okay? Ooh, what's this? Like a lot of logos, but let me walk you through it. So I will also teach you a new concept called scopes of emissions. Okay. So there is an organization. It's called the Greenhouse Gas Protocol that classifies emissions according to type. Okay. All right. So there's three types of emissions. You have scope 1, 2, and 3. That's very easy. It's just 1, 2, and 3. But let me talk to you a little bit more about the difference and kind of translate this into your real life. So scope 1, these are what we call direct emissions. So if you walk on the street and then you're eating or finishing your snack, the wrapper that you throw into your garbage is your emissions. It's your direct emissions. Okay? If your parents drive you to school, the emissions coming out from the car is a direct emission. It's a direct emission coming from you. That's scope 1. Okay? Clear so far? You can nod if it's clear. I think I see a lot of nods. So I think yes, that's clear. Scope, we have the scope 2 emission, which is indirect. What do you mean by indirect emission? So in the room where you are right now, you have lights, right? And that energy to provide for the light is probably coming from the city or from a company that provides energy. Okay. So the direct emissions is the emissions that directly comes from you. It comes from your daily life when you cook and you throw waste. That's directly a direct emission. It's a scope 1 emission. It's coming, like if you have an old clothes that you want to throw, that's already as a direct emission. It's something that you can control yourself. So the more things you throw, for example, you're not recycling plastic cups. So that is directly coming from your emissions. It's a scope 1 emission. And there's a lot of ways to make it less, by recycling more, reusing things, not getting a lot of plastic bags from the supermarket. So that's, think of it as a direct emission. Okay, from a personal standpoint. So from your standpoint, it's a direct emission. Okay. Scope 2 emissions is a little bit um, different because that has something to do with your um, where you live. Like for example, in your room, as I was just saying, you have lights in there, right? You have like, I can see it. So the city is actually providing you energy, right? So the way they make the energy is your scope 2 emissions. If you have a lot of solar panels in your school, or if you have a lot of wind, if you have a windmill in the city where you're living, your scope 2 emissions will be lower. So this is something that you cannot really control from a personal level, but it really is dependent on the city, the council, the country, the prime minister, to put more of these renewable sources of energy to make our scope 2 emissions lower. Okay? And for the sake of complexity, I won't talk about scope 3 emissions today. I will only talk about scope 1 and 2. Scope 2, we have very little control as individuals because it is dependent on our community leaders. But scope 1 is something that you could actually do yourself. by consuming less energy, maybe cycling to school if it's a safe pathway for you, or if it's not too or not too far from where you live, and less use or using the public transport, for example, that would lessen your scope 1 emissions. Okay. All right. So we have a few more slides to cover, and we wanted to finish on time. So I'm gonna finish the scope 1 and 2. I hope it's clear. If it's not clear, I'm happy to discuss with your teacher so they could elaborate more in the next weeks. And try to give more examples for so that you can better understand what scope 1 and scope 2 emissions are. Okay. A little bit more about the company, Baker Hughes. I'm sure my colleagues have already spoken about the different um, uh, products that we're selling as a company, or some of the technologies we're working on. So I'll give you a high level, a kind of like a general overview about Baker Hughes. Baker Hughes, we are an energy technology company. We make energy safer, cleaner, and more efficient for the people and the planet. We deploy different technologies like engineering, different devices, all this big stuff that I showed you earlier to provide energy for different parts of the world, really. Like not just in the United Kingdom and Britain, but also in the Philippines, in Belgium, where I live right now, in Brazil, because they would have different, like surroundings and landscapes. So we all cover those different countries and geographies and aim to provide a sustainable, affordable, and secure energy for the people and the planet. So that's kind of what our mission is and what our technologies are. I talked about the targets and goals of the company in terms of reducing our emissions, our contribution to pollution. So, net zero, meaning we aim to have net zero emissions in 2050. And we also aim to reduce our emissions by 50% in 2030. And I'm only talking about scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, as I shared with you earlier. So the direct emissions and then the emissions that we get from our energy, so that we can power our offices and our facilities with cleaner energy. So net zero emissions, 50% in 2030. So imagine if you are actually throwing 10 plastic bags a day, you just have to think that by 2030, we should have reduced that by half. And by 2050, we should not be throwing anything anymore. So that's kind of like the analogy. Of course, it's a little bit more complex than that, but that's kind of like the simplest way to describe it. Okay, so I'd like to highlight some of the results of how we care about the people and the planet and the environment. I won't talk about everything, but I will only highlight, I think, the parts where I'm personally passionate about. So for people, diversity, equity, and inclusion is very important for us as a company. I mean, you see me working with my colleagues here. I am obviously not born in Europe, so I am contributing to the diversity of thought and the diversity of ideas, of personality that all bring to the different creative technologies that we deploy in our company. So we are very much um, a diverse culture, and we welcome the differences. We do not discriminate in the company of where you came from, or where were you born. So that makes me really feel good about working for the company. So we really care about people and the diversity and the inclusion and the equity for a planet. So we talk a lot about emissions. So we already reduced our emissions by 23%. That's almost 1 in 4, no? So I thought that was a very great achievement for us. and to accurately measure and reduce the emission is a great feat. We also recycled a lot of wastes last year in 2020, not last year, but 20 in 2021, because we're still calculating the 2022 now. And we also used less water in our technologies, in our operations. So how can you uh, use less water, or how can you recycle more in your house? Did you actually measure, or maybe consciously think, I should less more water, I should less use less water now than last week, or last year, or we should recycle more? Are we recycling at home? Think about it and ponder upon some of the things you are doing at home, and maybe discuss with your sisters, brothers, your siblings, your mom and dad, like how can we use less water at home, and how can we recycle more? We constantly talk about this in the company, about how we can do this as a team, as a group of people working in the same location, and as a bigger organization. And of course, principles, meaning doing the right thing always. To me, this is very important, that you have to always do the right thing, even if no one is looking at you. Honesty, integrity, and respect. So these are some of the values I personally care about. And we do value this in the company. Um, we are um, we have a lot of training to make sure that we follow the rules and regulations in different places where we work. And we also have a lot of safety, like in your school you have fire extinguishers, you have that you know where the fire exit is. So that is also part of our training to develop, or to enhance, or further um, emphasize the culture of doing the right thing all the time. So it's honesty and integrity, which I believe is also ingrained in your respective schools. Okay, this is something that I would like to use Menti for. First thing that comes into mind when you hear the term sustainability, I talked a little bit more about it earlier, but I would like to just get your thought again on Menti. Sustainability, renewable, green, secure. Wow, this is super like advanced again. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, we're about to wrap up. I would like to close this talk with what I think sustainability is about. Discuss to you, like for the last 5 minutes, what sustainability is uh, for me and for the company. For me, it's all about people and engagement. So things like this initiative um, brings sustainability to action. Like it's good to have books and learn, but if you could spread the word, whatever you learn from here today, if I ask you to share it to your sibling or to your family and to engage with them, to me, that is sustainability, because you get to influence other people and make them learn from what you've learned today. For me, it's about policy. Policy meaning doing the right thing always. Um, all the time, even if no one's looking. To me, that's sustainable. Recycling, even if your teachers are not monitoring you, or using less water, even if your parents are not telling you to do so. That is, to me, sustainability. Technology and innovation. You are curious, bright, talented individuals. I want you to use your creativity to contribute to future technology and innovation, even in the small efforts in your school, a small project, creative work, innovation knows no boundaries. So to me, that is sustainability. And finally, I would like to say that you have a role to play in this energy transition and sustainability journey, and that you can think of different activities that fall under SMART. When you think of a project, I'd like you to think about what SMART is, and I think my colleagues will give a little bit more flavor about it later. It has to be specific, has to be measurable, it has to be attainable, has to be realistic. Obviously, I mean, we can all be creative about our goals, but it's good, it's smart if it's realistic, and it has to be time bound. I'll give you my smart goal this week. Thing, this week, because it's sunny, so I don't have a lot. It's not snowing anymore in Brussels. By counting how many hours I turn on the heating, I know it's attainable because I've done it before, and I know it's realistic because it's being done by also by my friends. And I'll probably test this for a week. Only now with the weather forecast that it's warm. So to me, that is a smart objective for the year that contributes to sustainability and energy efficiency. We can be all sustainable, even in our own right. So with that, I hand over to my colleague Rosalind. Thanks a lot for having me over. If you have some questions, send them to your teachers, and then my colleagues will share it with me, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks a lot, everyone, and have a great journey for Girls Get Set program.